When President Trump discusses a migrant crime spree, migrant crime, as he calls it, as if somehow some magical term has been invented, what you'll hear is people screaming that Donald Trump is just anti-immigrant, he's anti-brown people, he hates this one, he hates that one. And very often you'll hear a terminology that I have found to be just absolutely horrific, that people who come to this country, migrants, commit less crimes than those people who are American citizens. And I make a very, very compelling basic argument that if we're talking about just numbers of people, I'm not surprised. But if we're talking about percentages, this is a different conversation. And most importantly, none of that would explain, should explain, or could explain whether or not we allow people to illegally enter the United States or create levels of status that create us issue. Creating issue for citizens is a terrible idea. Tony Katz Today. Good to be with you. Steven Malanga joins me right now, senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, and he is the senior editor of City Journal. He's written for the Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, New York Times, a host of other publications, the author of numerous books, including Shakedown, the Continuing Conspiracy Against the American Taxpayer, that in 2010. And over at City Journal, where the smart people write, the story is, no, you're not imagining a migrant crime spree. You started going through the numbers. Before we get to numbers, let's get to this concept, this idea that we hear from people who politically, it would be on the political left, but you could hear it from others. This idea that, well, the data shows that people in the country from other nations commit less crimes than American citizens. How does someone like yourself respond to that conversation?
Well, first of all, the mainstream media was filled with stories like headlines like the myth of the migrant crime wave not supported by data, and especially earlier this year as the presidential campaign, heated up. Part of the discussion is about this study that was done years ago on data just from Texas, which was one of the few states that actually collects data on migrant criminals in their jails. And that study said that the rate of incarceration for illegals was actually below the rate of incarceration for American citizens. Subsequent to that, however, there have been other studies using other databases. There's a federal program, because the federal government is responsible for immigration. When states arrest people and they put them in jail and they turn out to be illegal, the federal government reimburses these people, the states, for this incarceration. In order to get reimbursed, you have to essentially file detailed reports. Every state does. How many illegals you have, what they're in for, and so forth and so on. Using that data from 10 states, including so-called sanctuary states like New York and California, which don't want to cooperate with immigration officials, but they do want to get paid by the federal government for incarcerating illegals. Using that data, researchers have determined that, in fact, the rate of incarceration for illegals is 2 to 3 times in most states what it is for citizens. And this just essentially bolsters what we're seeing in front of us. I'll give you an example. 18 Republican states have sued the Biden administration, again, over the cost of illegal immigration. All of those lawsuits go into the details about migrant crime. States are spending tens of millions of dollars focusing just on crime from illegals, but particularly since the Biden surge began, as cartels and others send illegals through the borders to do things like smuggle drugs, rob homes. The so-called retail theft is actually being organized now and engineered by these immigrant groups. So we know from the states themselves that this is going on. So it's very hard to ignore unless you want to go out of your way to ignore it, the way some in the mainstream media did around the time that this whole issue really flared up once the presidential campaign got going earlier in 2024.
The data that they're basing it on, you mentioned in your piece over at city-journal.org, the myth of the migrant crime wave. Migrant crime wave not supported by data. Immigrants are less likely to commit crimes. This, to you, is coordinated to push a study that doesn't match up with the most current data.
Yes, absolutely. The federal program that I'm talking about is called the State Criminal Alien Assistance Program. And states have to file detailed reports on the immigrants who are incarcerated in their states in order to get reimbursed by the government. The Government Accountability Office in Washington, which is a branch of the government, actually began using this database years ago for other reasons. And people kind of looked at this and said, oh, wow, there's all this data out there. And they began studying it. And it clearly shows this. But again, this is also just a research study. You know, your eyes tell you what's going on. And there can't possibly be this many states, including blue states, sanctuary states like California, which are mustering all of these resources to stop things like smuggling, human trafficking. They all mention human trafficking, which is a terrible problem we have in this country right now. A lot of it has to do with sex workers being brought into the country, essentially as slaves, really, being brought into the country, including Chinese sex workers who are, being trafficked as far north as Oklahoma and Idaho and Iowa and places like that. I mean, we can't have all these states saying they're battling these problems and people deny that there's a problem out there.
Talking to Steven Malanga of City Journal, city-journal.org, senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, senior editor of the City Journal. As you go through it and as you start looking at this, you look at a series of pieces of data, including those in prison in California, in New York, in New Jersey, in Arizona, in Texas. And the data shows that the numbers are actually disproportionate to people who are in the country illegally.
Exactly.
So when this is clearly seen, when it's clearly understood that people who are here illegally are indeed committing crimes, they are certainly in jails in higher rates. Texas having the smallest difference between legal residents and illegal immigrants in rates. This is what we should be honestly discussing, but it doesn't get honestly discussed, and it's not honestly discussed for its political ramifications.
Yeah, here's the thing. Even common sense tells you that, okay, we've had millions of people come through the surge for, claiming asylum or just coming completely illegally. We know that there are millions and millions of people. As a border agent recently said in testifying before Congress, even if just a small percentage of these people are criminals, because the people have not been vetted carefully. We know that, especially the people claiming asylum. They're not vetted extensively before they're released into the country. Even if just a small percentage of them are criminals, we know that is going to be a serious problem because there are so many people who have come. And, here's the thing. The Biden administration, even as all those people were coming, the Biden administration slowed deportations of people who've been arrested in this country, illegals. What happened is they issued an executive order which said that the only way we're going to deport someone who's, like, for instance, committed a felony is if that person is an imminent danger to the community. And what that meant is that they now have to go through individual case studies of all of these felons who are illegal aliens and determine which of them they want to deport and which they don't. And the first thing that is done is it has doubled the backlog of deportation cases, right, and it has slowed deportations of people who commit crimes, felonies, have been cut in half since the Trump administration. So you now have people coming here illegally or coming to seek asylum. They commit a felony in the country. and we don't automatically deport them. And that just makes no sense to me at all. No sense whatsoever.
Which gets us into this conversation about policy. Certainly, the border and illegal immigration is moving a large part of this election. And since the debate regarding Springfield, Ohio, and Haitian immigrants and eating the cats and eating the dogs, I went to Springfield, Ohio, spoke to some of the residents there. They'll tell you people aren't eating cats and dogs per se, but there are certainly issues with traffic accidents, with people learning the language, with a stress on social services. Logansport, Indiana is now getting national news for this idea of stress on local services. This goes back to the idea of immigration policy as a whole and the value of immigration policy. Certainly there can be no value to allowing people in when you don't know who they are. Certainly there could be a value to the idea of allowing people into the country because we have jobs that need to be filled, and certainly we don't mind being the nation of immigrants, as we often hear the expression. But is there policy that you're looking at? You quote the Federation for American Immigration Reform, which is known as FAIR. Others that would that would take on TPS, temporary protected status, which creates some of this issue, or really is a rethink of what we see at the border as a whole?
Well, I mean, among other things, only about 15% of people who come here and claim asylum status actually qualify for asylum and get it. Okay. Now, if you let everybody who comes to the border, and you even create, as they did, a special app for people to apply, if you let everybody come in and just let them into the country, all right, something like, I can't remember the exact number, 90 to 95% of people who apply for asylum status, who have applied in the past couple of years for asylum status, aren't bothering to show up for their asylum hearing. They're in the country for 7. The reason they're not showing up is they know they're not going to be approved for asylum. Right. So the first thing is, right, there has to be a sorting process at the border. Okay, it's been said again and again that the vast majority of people during the Biden years have come in, they're essentially unvetted. So the first thing you would do at the border is you would begin asking questions about their case to determine if they even have a chance of getting asylum, right, before you do something like let them in and schedule a hearing. The other thing is you can't let people in for asylum if there's a 3-year wait for a hearing, right, because they're just going to disappear in the country. So this is just all common sense. But the whole surge was designed, I mean, you get the feeling that it was just designed to overwhelm the system, right? It's just like purposely overwhelmed the system. And you know, the excuse now is, well, we can't deny people who might legitimately want asylum, right, because of this. But if you really want to serve people who legitimately want asylum, you don't encourage this kind of mass rush to the border, which obscures, you know, the whole issue and essentially groups people who aren't likely to qualify for asylum with people who need asylum, who genuinely need it. So again, part of the victims here, part of it is that the victims are the people who are legitimately trying to get into the country through a legal process and have a reason to get into the country. They're as much victimized by the craziness that we've seen at the border. The whole system is broken down. I mean, we literally suspended in 2023, the Biden administration suspended giving visas to foreign nurses, foreign trained nurses. We have a program because we need nurses. We literally stopped giving visas to foreign trained nurses because Immigration Services was overwhelmed and they couldn't process these visas for people that we actually need. But Canada actually said to these nurses, if you know, when we paused this program, send us your application materials from the United States. We'll let you in. So you know, this system what the Biden administration did is essentially just melt down the whole process. And in the process, you know, the people who deserve to be here aren't being let in.
And meanwhile, as you write over at city-journal.org, Chinese gangs controlling areas of Oklahoma and marijuana sales, a subject for another day. Steven Malanga is his name. City Journal, city-journal.org. Check out the piece there from Steven. No, you're not imagining a migrant crime spree. Steven, I appreciate you taking the time. More is coming up. I'm Tony Katz.